Hello there, M&A Advisor community. This is Roger Aguinaldo, and welcome back to the M&A Advisor podcast. Since 1998, the M&A Advisor's mission is to recognize achievements, provide thought leadership, and connect professionals in mergers and acquisitions for the purpose of improving your deal-making craft and accelerating your deal flow. We are so glad you're joining us for this insightful and inspiring podcast conversation curated for mergers and acquisitions professionals. Whether you're an aspiring deal maker, a seasoned professional, or just curious about the world of mergers and acquisitions, you'll find something valuable and relevant in our podcast. Our goal is to bring you the best insights, stories, and tips from the experts who've been there and done that, so you can learn from their successes and mistakes and take your deal-making skills to the next level. But before we dive into today's episode, we have a small favor to ask you. If you enjoy listening to our podcast and find it useful, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and subscribing to our M&A Alerts newsletter. You can find the links in the description below. This will help us reach more people like you and grow our community of M&A professionals. It will also let us know that you appreciate our work and want us to keep producing more quality content for you. Plus, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll always be in the loop with the latest trends in the M&A world to improve and accelerate your deal making. So please follow us. You are the reason we do what we do, and we couldn't do it without you. And now for today's podcast. In this episode, we're diving deep into my conversation with our special guest, Brent Baxter, the CEO of the Association for Corporate Growth, that's ACG. Together, we will discover Brent's journey, beginning with his early days through his successful M&A career, uncovering life lessons, challenges, inspirations, and quotable quotes sprinkled along the way. Buckle up for an entrancing journey through time. Hi, welcome to the M&A Advisor podcast. I'm Roger Aguinaldo, the creator and CEO of the M&A Advisor. The M&A Advisor is the preeminent organization that recognizes excellence, honors achievement, presents thought leadership, and facilitates connections among the world's leading mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, and deal-making professionals. Join me as I talk to, in our industry, the upper echelon of M&A and in parts the distressed and restructuring turnaround industry. Our previous podcast talked through distressed and restructuring, but today on our show, I'm very honored to welcome our special guest, Brent Baxter, who is the CEO of the Association for Corporate Growth. ACG is an organization providing a global community for mergers and acquisitions and corporate growth professionals with a mission of driving middle market growth. Brent Baxter assumed the office of CEO of ACG, I think on July 31st of 2023, just last year. Brent has more than 25 years of sell-side and buy-side advisory experience in middle market M&A, closing more than 200 transactions with a combined value of more than $1 billion. He has a long and dedicated history of supporting ACG in a volunteer capacity, serving in multiple positions on the ACG Board of Directors, and was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the 2023 DealMAX event. Prior to ACG, Brent worked with Nolan and Associates, a leading boutique investment banking firm with a focus on the middle market, where he has been a managing director since 2019. Brent spent 18 years as managing director of the St. Louis Independent Investment Bank. He also has extensive experience in growing private companies through acquisitions, serving as CEO of a food manufacturing company that more than quadrupled its sales in 8 years, and currently on the boards of several privately held companies. He earned a bachelor's degree at Allegheny College and a master's of business administration at the University of Pittsburgh. That's the Katz Graduate School of Business. So what an impressive background, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome our guest to the M&A Advisor podcast, Brent Baxter.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that excellent introduction and comprehensive. And thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be with you today.
Well, we read every bio, we looked at every LinkedIn, we dig up a lot of things that can be shared and can't be shared. This is a podcast. I think people want to hear really your evolution, right? Maybe Brent, how you got to where you are. A lot of our listeners are emerging leaders, those sort of earlier in their careers and thinking about going through mergers and acquisitions. Is this the right career for them? But it is an honor. Let's start at the beginning, Brent. Just love to start where you are. Maybe, you're at Allegheny College. Did you grow up in Pittsburgh? I actually went to school in Pittsburgh. I went to right down the street from UPitt, Carnegie Mellon University. So I'm,
great school.
I know all the joints, I guess you hung out with. So how did you start your career and where were you thinking of moving forward through your career?
Thanks for asking. So I grew up outside of Pittsburgh in a now formerly steel mill community called McKeesport. And a bit of a history lesson there. When I was very young, McKeesport had 10,000 mill jobs in a community of 50,000 people. And by the time I think I had finished maybe college, maybe a little bit after, all 10,000 of those jobs had disappeared and McKeesport became a very, very challenged community. Allegheny is a small liberal arts school in northwestern Pennsylvania. And I started there. I had thoughts that I might like to go on and get a PhD and teach. And at the same time, I got a job at a fairly fancy restaurant as a busboy. And I got to know.
Was that the big? Do you remember that? The originals? I think they had we would always go to get hot dogs down there. I think that's what I don't know if you know what I'm doing.
Yep, the Big O's, yep. And Primanti Brothers, where they put the French fries and the coleslaw on the sandwich.
Yeah. Now, did that start, by the way, just as an aside, did that start there? I remember that. And then now it's like this huge franchise all over the place.
Yeah, Primanti's definitely started in Pittsburgh in the Strip District. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you and I might have bumped into each other over a beer. What year did you go?
But my first real career inflection was when I realized I got to know one of the professors at Allegheny, which is a small school, and this gentleman had come on board, and actually the religion department, and it was a non-tenure track position, and he had a PhD. And I realized I was making more money as a busboy than he was as a non-tenure track professor at a small school. And during that restaurant experience, I also found I just had a knack for business. I liked it. I ended up right after graduation running that restaurant, and a lot of life skills in the restaurant business. So,
a lot of people don't know how complicated actually the restaurant business is. We do it every day, but you go on the other side of it. There's a lot of a lot of things that could actually go wrong, right?
Oh, I've experienced most of them, which is a story for a different day. But you're absolutely right. It's a great early experience, whether front of the house or back of the house. But at age, I guess, 21, I was running. It was a fairly fancy Italian gourmet restaurant. We did also stuff at the table side, bananas flambe and flaming coffees and Caesar salads and all sorts of fun stuff.
What was the name of that restaurant? Because I know I probably.
Well, it was
actually college budget. I probably wouldn't have afforded it.
It was in Meadville, Pennsylvania, but it was called Sandini's and has since morphed more than once in its brand. But I joined a privately owned business in Pittsburgh, I guess in my early 20s. It was a business that was in the grocery wholesale arena, and they had a variety of other small subsidiaries. And the owner of that business, who knew my dad, the owner of that business, had always wanted to be in the restaurant business. So he hired young Brent to see if he could pioneer that business and get them in the restaurant business.
Oh, wow. So you were in a start. So you started in a startup restaurant.
Well, I went from running an established restaurant to try to start up a restaurant. And interestingly, I said to the owner, I think what you ought to do is buy an existing restaurant chain. So that was the launch of my M&A life. And we got the letter of intent with a 15 or 16 unit restaurant chain in Florida. But meanwhile, back at the parent company, the third generation of the company had come into leadership. They made a number of aggressive acquisitions in the grocery area. And within 9 months of those acquisitions, the company filed for Chapter 11. Yeah. So my restaurant acquisition did not close. We'll just put it that way.
Okay.
Curiously, by that time, I had one reason or another, I had taken operating responsibility for some of the non-grocery businesses that the company owned, a food service distribution business, a college food service business, and some health and beauty aid businesses. And all of those businesses were profitable while the parent larger grocery business was in serious financial trouble. Our second largest creditor was a large grocery wholesale company located in St. Louis, now also long gone. But as our second largest creditor, they came in and took managerial control of the business. And since the businesses I was running happened to be profitable, I guess I was the shiny penny back at that time. And there was a significant downsizing of the leadership team. And I found myself essentially at age 29 being the point person in Pittsburgh for this St. Louis-based company, running them through a Chapter 11 reorganization. So
Wow.
it was a pretty heady experience. I had a mentor that came in kind of 2 days a week that was semi-retired. And at the same time, I was finishing up my executive MBA program at the University of Pittsburgh. So to some extent, kind of two graduate degrees at the same time, the academic one and then the hard knocks.
Well, I was sort of baptism by fire, right? In a really early age working. And we had a few podcasts around what time or what year was that?
It would have been, early 1980s, late 70s, early 80s. Yep.
Yeah. So you may know that the bankruptcy laws were just changing and getting implemented through the process. So they were trying new stuff, right?
Yep.
New things. And it's interesting that you're in the midst of that. Two things I want to brush on that. What are the key takeaways from that experience at such a young age that you might be able to share with our audience? And then two, you mentioned you had a mentor. I think we talk about finding mentors, getting mentors. I would presume that maybe the creditors forced this mentor on you that said, okay, you got to work with this guy. But tell us about that experience and how important it is to seek out or even have mentors.
So on the mentor side, again, the public company was called Wetterau, and they had a semi-retired senior executive who had run several of their larger business units. He lived in Florida. So he came in on behalf of Wetterau basically to restructure the business. And for good or ill, he was the person who selected me as the number two guy to be in the office Friday or Monday through Sunday. And he was just a very talented business person, good instincts, smart, high energy. And I'll correlate that to the learning of that bankruptcy. The company was pretty much in a mess. And through the bankruptcy process, we literally took it apart and put it back together again. I think we could not have done without the extra support, but you were able to really dive deep and understand what was working inside the company, where the value drivers were, what would integrate well into the parent company, which was Wetterau. But we sold 6 or 8 businesses. We closed real estate. We sold real estate. We sold stores. We sold warehouse locations. And literally in a period of 9 months, a company emerged that was profitable. And that was the same time that I got my MBA. And the next step on that life journey was there no longer was a business in Pittsburgh because it had been fully integrated into Wetterau's operations, and I had an MBA. And fortunately, Wetterau asked me to come out to their headquarter location in St. Louis. So that was in the mid 1980s. And then ended up with them after about a year running a frozen bakery operation, which you mentioned in the introduction. That was the time when, because of the ability of the industry literally to freeze yeast, you
Yep.
were able to create frozen dough products that were consistent. So the French bread in all 1,000 Winn-Dixie stores was the same, the Safeway and so forth. And literally by accident, Wetterau was a leader in that particular technology. It was just a series of luck and circumstances that put me in the role. But that period of time, 25,000 supermarkets put in-store bakery in, and 25,000 independent bakers went out of business. So
Wow. Yeah.
pointing edge of that equation, that company was
Yeah.
growing.
No. Well. Yeah. Well, things shift, right? So a lot of
Right.
what a lot of people, I think incorrectly, listen, we're probably a little bit biased in M&A and private equity, but a lot of mom and pops need to shift. That's where it was going. And it's much more convenient for shoppers and the consumers anyway, right? You're already over there. You might as well get your fresh bread and bakery things. And it sounds like at that food manufacturing business. What was the name of that business?
It had a couple different name changes. At the end, it was called Hazelwood Farms. We weren't visible to the consumer. So we were the product that you thought they made in the supermarket and store.
Yeah. So you would white label. So you would
Basically, they would take the frozen dough out of the box and sell it as Safeway or AMP. We did business with essentially all 100 of the top grocery retailers in the country. And the grocery industry was going through significant disruption. Then Walmart had decided to enter the grocery business, and 7 or 8 years later, they were the number one grocer in the country. So huge disruption in the industry. We were disrupting the bakery side. Roll that clock forward. Wetterau was acquired by a Minneapolis company called SuperValue, and SuperValue, held the bakery for exactly 5 years for some tax reasons. And at the end of the 5th anniversary of the acquisition of Wetterau, the business I was running was sold to Pillsbury, and I was not going to be part of I was redundant, shall we say.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, unless you wanted to join the big corporate bureaucracy of Pillsbury. So I guess this sort of leads us to your next iteration of life. Did this now, you said, okay, now let me go from the operations side, running a company to investment banking. How did that transition happen? Do any of your transactions have international elements? Do you have a colleague or coworker who does excellent work with international M&A deals? Do you aspire to become a recognized international M&A professional yourself? Take that first step in being recognized for your international mergers and acquisitions transactions. This is Roger Aguinaldo, the creator and CEO of the M&A Advisor, and I invite you to nominate you or your peers to the 15th Annual International M&A Awards today. There are 8 general awards categories, which include firm, professional, product or service, M&A, financing, restructuring, sector, and regional transaction awards. Nomination deadlines are coming soon, so please don't be late or you'll miss out nominating yourself or your transaction. For more information about how to nominate, please visit the M&A Advisor website at www.maadvisor.com or click on the link in the podcast description below. Don't miss out. The International M&A Awards nominations will close soon. Take that first step in being recognized for your international M&A transactions by nominating today.
Well, I wish I could claim it was intentional, but it was accidental. It was about age 40, and for a 40-year-old person at that time, I had a pretty significant amount of P&L experience and had this bankruptcy experience, had this high growth company experience, I had M&A experience. I'd run a sort of a variety of different businesses, and I really felt I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. And I started the process of looking for a business to buy, worked with a business broker firm to do that, began to meet investment banking firms in St. Louis, Chicago. There really weren't a lot of investment banking firms in Chicago, in St. Louis at that time. And 18 months into that journey, had a moment in time when there were 1 or 2 companies that might have been a suitable investment. I was offered a CEO job in the frozen bakery industry with private equity that would have been very interesting. Probably a job I would have taken had it landed 18 months sooner. It was in Fargo, so that was a little bit
Okay.
for the lifestyle that I thought
A little far to go,
yeah,
right?
exactly. It's well named. But I just had done some M&A work. I had worked with a company called Obo and Pan, which had at that time bought a company called the St. Louis Bread Company, which is now Panera.
Right.
And shortly after leaving Hazelwood Farms, came to understand that St. Louis Bread had just built a large frozen bakery manufacturing facility about 60 miles outside of St. Louis. And they really didn't have any sense of what they were doing as a large scale manufacturer. So I helped them try to get that plant up and running. And about 6 months into that engagement, I went to the leadership of Obo and Pan and said, you guys really shouldn't be in the manufacturing business. It's not strategic. You should be doing your baking at store level, and you should be buying your products where you need them from third parties. They said, you're right. Would you help us sell this facility? And then I was retained to help them sell that facility. The other sort of tidbit at that time, Obo and Pan was a public company and had a reasonable amount of debt. At the same time that we sold the bakery assets, they had another investment bank that sold the Obo and Pan chain, and the emerging public company, because of those two transactions, retired all their debt, had a chest of cash. And that is what enabled them to grow Panera.
Oh.
That was my start in the investment banking business. I joined a small firm for a couple of years, went off with some other folks and founded a firm. And then about 18 years later, moved my practice to Nolan, which brings me to at least 6 or 8 months ago when I joined ACG.
Yeah. So tell us about that experience. So when did you sell your sort of boutique? So you have a boutique investment banking firm that you founded or was partner with, or you were partnered with someone, or you founded it, or were other partners in that firm?
Yep.
Name it. What was that firm?
That's we're just better said. That's a different chapter in the past. And so,
All right. And then you sold it to Nolan.
I moved my portion, sort of think about an attorney or moving a practice. I moved my practice to Nolan. So,
okay. And when did you move it to Nolan?
About 6 years ago. 6 years.
Oh, okay. All right. So then now you're at Nolan, and what types of deals were you doing at Nolan?
So both firms were middle market, sell side, buy side. Sell side, we were in the 2 to 15 million EBITDA, family owned businesses. We also had a pretty significant buy side practice, augmenting corporate development in most cases rather than private equities. On the buy side, we worked for companies as large as Alcoa. We worked for several Berkshire Hathaway subsidiaries. We had a good, solid corporate practice as well as the traditional sell side M&A. And Nolan, very similar. Nolan's in the 2 to maybe 20 million EBITDA range now, and a great firm. St. Louis has a handful of investment banking firms, but it's nothing like a Chicago or New York or Philadelphia where you have a plethora of big.
Yeah. And does Nolan is national or primarily regional?
Nope. Okay. Or is national.
Okay. And you're still affiliated with them. It's on their website. You're a senior advisor.
Yeah, that's correct. And taking the ACG position is absolutely a full-time and very dedicated to the success of ACG. But for anybody that's been in the investment banking business for 25 years, you have a series of relationships and folks that 5 years ago said, Brent, I want to call you when I'm ready. So my role with Nolan is fairly limited in terms of just transitioning relationships, maintaining some of those relationships for the great team at Nolan. But I'm not actively soliciting clients. That would be out of keeping with my role at ACG. So,
let's talk about ACG, your sort of transition into ACG and why you became CEO of ACG and why you decided to become CEO. You're in the, so you sort of, ran businesses before. Maybe that's where your true passion is. You were an investment banker, and then now you come to run ACG. So tell us how that evolved, and then we'll talk about where you think ACG is headed.
Sure. A couple of sort of contextual things there. In that entire time in investment banking, ACG was vitally critical to the success of any of the firms I was affiliated with. It's where we found clients. It's where we found buyers and sellers and advisors. And I think it is fair to say that the relationships I built in ACG were probably responsible for 75, 80% of the clients that was secured. And it's pretty interesting to think about an industry trade association being that critical to the success of its members. So deep relation. And I got that referral system because I was active in ACG and got active in local governance in St. Louis. I went on the global board, was active in governance there, became the treasurer and then in the office of the chair. So essentially I sat in the executive committee of the global board for 5 or 6 years. ACG had some transition in leadership. We had a long-term person leave to get a much better job. Gary LeBranch, great guy. And then just some challenges, some interim folks, a person who didn't work, some interim folks, and then a person who was with us for 3 years who made a lot of changes. And then he left to go to a better job. So sort of realized that during that period of time, we'd have
So all the good people kind of leave to a better job. It's
well, I'd say it this way, that trade associations, you're a fun fact to know and tell for today, there's 181,000 trade associations in the United States. And most of them are run by trade association professionals. And in the case of ACG and many of our peers. And it really struck me, and ACG is not incredibly unique, but I'd say it's a pretty different trade association, meaning we're not the trade association of orthodontists or the trade association of pediatric surgeons. The ACG membership is very diverse, very nuanced. Our chapter system is diverse, and what makes a chapter successful and board successful Kansas City is different than what goes on in Tampa or New York or Boston or West Coast. And as we have a significant constituency in middle market private equity, probably 60-70% market share there. We have a large number of independent sponsors and family offices, but we have a huge number of corporate acquirers. We have as many corporate members in ACG as we do private equity managing a fund. So one part of ACG is deal flow, another part is education, but that whole referral system is much nuanced. I got clients because I got to know accounting professionals and bankers and lawyers and wealth advisors. And so there's huge complex network of who is most relevant, remember to me. And I just didn't feel that the moving, particularly after that leadership churn, if you will, to bring another trade association person in felt risky. We needed to have someone that really understood the ACG member value proposition. And you mentioned it earlier. I loved my investment banking career. I loved it because you built these super intense relationships with founders, sellers. It's very, very connected when you get someone through a sale process. And then the deal closes and they go away and on to the next one. So it's incredibly transactional. And that first 20 years of my career, when I was leading businesses, you got to see longitudinal change. You got to see the impact of leadership over time. And I've done this, to be blunt, I love ACG. It's been an important part of my life. I've met hundreds of professional colleagues, but I've also built a network of friends and colleagues and people I trust and know and respect. And I have a deep affinity for the organization, and it really just felt like the right thing for Brent to do at this point in his career. At the time, we had Korn Ferry engaged for a search process, and they had been in the process for 3 months. I was actually at DealMAX last year that I had this, I hate to say it, but kind of calling, and that it just really felt like this was Brent's time. Called my board colleagues and said I'd like to be considered. The board, to their credit,
you threw your name. You had an epiphany at last year's DealMAX.
Yeah,
your name into the
kind
hat.
of did. I kind of did.
Yeah.
Well, and part of it just wasn't my affinity to the organization, but because of my leadership role, I knew the leadership team. I knew the people. I knew so many of our chapter executives. I knew a lot of our chapter leaders. And I knew how difficult it would be to go through another leadership transition, another unknown person coming in. And we had some incredible outside candidates, to my understanding, but I'm just thrilled that I was selected. And I don't want this to sound cheesy, but I'm doing this for ACG. This is not a stepstone in my career path. This is something I'm doing because I so believe in ACG. We have a remarkable brand. It is strong. Our members talk about the depth of their connectivity with ACG. Our active members go to dozens and dozens of events a year, and they build these huge networks. We have this amazing asset, and we have lots of ways to build on that asset to create deeper connectivity among our members. For the middle market, particularly the private equity side of the middle market, has essentially doubled or tripled in 15 years. And ACG membership has been relatively flat during that time period. And it does mean that there are areas that we've probably let other folks serve our members, even though we are probably best served to serve those members.
Let me and I'll do a plug in for the association. Congratulations on being selected as CEO of ACG. I'm sure it's an honor, and it sounds like your heart's in the right place, at least for memberships. And it sounds like the fit is there. Many of the people that came before you were probably more sort of professional association leaders. Nothing wrong with that. But I think you're right. I think ACG it's similar to, you got to understand the M&A industry, right? It's very diverse.
Right.
It is transactional. You're either in it and then you're on to the next one, or you're in it and then you're out of it, right?
Yes.
So congratulations certainly on that. Many of our listeners and our audience at M&A Advisor know when I began the newsletter in 1998, who did I know? I didn't know. I didn't know anyone, right? I'm at a boutique firm, just coming from Merrill Lynch at a boutique firm. And there was really no place and this is 1998, Brent, this is 1998. Just think about that. And so I heard of this organization, and they were having a chapter meeting in New York. And I just start going, and the nicest people, friendly people. They're like, who is this guy? I'm like, hey, it's just a little newsletter. Talking, then they say, oh, come on in and, learn about the deal business and even in your career. Because remember, I'm working at a boutique investment banking firm, and, besides your clients, who else are you talking to in the deal world, right? And it's really about, and even today, it's really about who you're connected to. Right. And a lot of people think, and just for our younger listeners, right, and people who are going for their MBAs, and it is about the technical stuff. Yes. You got to know about, you got LOIs and documents and, spreadsheets, yada, yada, yada. It is about all of that technical stuff. But M&A is a people business, right? It's knowing the right people and knowing what fits with the particular company or whatever you're selling. And if you're dealing with, and you sound like you've dealt with a lot of family-owned, closely held businesses, they don't always do rational analysis, right? They're always, a lot of this is emotional. So you really got to understand the people in this, the advisors in this, the capital that surrounds it. And I've seen it over the past 26 years, how the middle market, lower middle market, and even large market has evolved, even over the past 5 to 10 years with private debt, right? So just how much private debt has pretty much overtaken private equity, right? Just in the number of different deals and transactions and the maturity of the capital. So ACG, I highly recommend people join, tell people, and anybody within listening this, recommend that start small, start at your local chapter,
Right.
get to know the people, go to as many as you can. You can't go to every lunch, can't go to everything. So there's really a lot to go to, right? And you could just do it at your local regional, but then it really changed, at least my perspective of ACG changed when I went to my first Intergrowth in 1999.
Mhm.
And I think it was at a resort in Arizona or something like that. I forget where it was, but it was a nice place. I just remember it was a really nice place. And get this, Brent, I think there were less than 400, 500 people there. And that was big. That was a big
Yeah,
event.
right. Yeah.
And we played tennis, and we didn't do, I didn't really go to any of the sessions. And I know you probably, it's like our events. Nobody everybody just wants to connect with each other. I played tennis. I did the little games that they had. And to this day, some of these are some of my closest friends in business.
Mhm.
So anyway, let's fast forward Intergrowth into DealMAX. It sounds like you were on the board when that transition happened. Tell me about that. It was you're just changing the name, right? It's nothing really different about it. Or is this a real shift to recognize what's going on in the industry? Maybe explain the Intergrowth transition into DealMAX and how it differs.
Yeah, I think a little bit of the brand change was simply nobody could really describe what Intergrowth really meant. It was an obtuse term, whereas Max Deal or DealMAX is a little more descriptive of what really goes on at many of our events. But there's been a significant investment in DealMAX. So pre-COVID, the largest Intergrowth was something in the neighborhood of 1,800 attendees. This April 29th through early May, registration still open. We're looking right in the neighborhood of 3,400, 3,500 attendees. So nearly a doubling of the size of the conference. We've invested in.
And that's over 2023 or over sort of pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID. So the last year we broke 3,000 and we're expecting a few hundred more this year. The scheduling tool, while on property, we will schedule something in the neighborhood of 13 to 14,000 one-on-one meetings. So those are meetings between private equity, investment bank, family offices, investment bank. Of some interest there are M&A partners, which you folks sometimes call service providers. 5,000 or 6,000 of those meetings will be our M&A partners meeting with private equity and investment bank to build those relationships. So it's a large event with many, many small events going on. In addition to that, there are just dozens and dozens of content sessions, and many of our large sponsors have conference rooms where they will have even more meetings. We're going to find a way to get 3,000 people together and create 15 or 16,000 really relevant one-on-one connections. And Roger, you mentioned it earlier. I was just back from our Dallas chapter, and one of the taglines they use is relationships are the deal. And that really captures it. It's no deal happens without relationships, and being able to facilitate that number of relationships while everybody's together in Las Vegas is the magic of DealMAX.
Yeah, well, no, congratulations on that. 13,000. We struggled to do about 30 people. So congratulations on that on there. So maybe in 2 sentences, why should someone? It's not cheap, right? It's fairly good at not only registration, but flight out to Vegas. And, I'm working on a deal. I can't take 3-4 days out of my, my schedule, that opportunity for those that have not made the decision, why should they go to ACG DealMAX?
Yeah, you do have a lot of choices inside, ACG. We have a number of events throughout our many chapters that have as few as 300 or 400 attendees, all deal focused. Our Dallas event was just 1,300. Our Atlanta event was 1,300. And those all have one-on-one meetings as well. The difference with DealMAX is it is 3 days. So most of the other events are a half day or a full day or a day and a half. So even though it is more expensive, it is treble the amount of time. So there is sort of a math relationship there. It's always good as your investment to work it, but if you can spend 3 days and build 50 new connections and do your follow-up afterward, something always comes out of that. I've had, and it's not always easy to define. I've had a casual conversation with someone I didn't know at a cocktail reception that led to a client. So as an investment bank, because I had relevant experience or I was able to refer someone to, so it is worth that investment. This is a transactional business. We talked about it earlier in the call. As an investment bank, you're only as good as the deal you just closed, and you always have to have a pipeline. And same with private equity. If you're not getting your fund invested, well, that's a bad day. So there's no such thing as too much deal flow, too much pipeline, and markets are soft right now. Deals are soft. And I'd say it's even more important that you're out there building your reputation and so forth.
So who should go to this? Is more like business development people, the heads of these firms, or should they be sending out their whole sort of deal team? Who should be going?
Yeah. So a little bit different answer for each of the major constituencies, but we've changed our pricing so that after the third attendee from a private equity fund or an investment bank, you get a discount. So we have some of the larger investment banks that are sending 25, 26 people. So essentially their whole deal team. We have private equity funds that will have 10, 12, 14 people, 20 people there. So that's a huge, massive connection. With 1,000 roughly private equity funds and 800 some investment banks, there is a wealth of relationships there for the accounting firms, the law firms, the insurance brokers, the search professionals, all that infrastructure that is our M&A partners. And it's back to that. Work your ground game. Don't just go there and expect to sit at a table and have people come to you. But you go there and have 40 or 50 meetings, you'll be exhausted. And at some point, the phone will ring. And the phone will ring from somebody you met or someone that remembered you and referred you. I mean, there's just no other event that has that amount of critical mass to it.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a few levels here. So you got private equity, you got investment bankers, and then service providers, I guess everybody else. And also you got corporate family offices,
Right.
Which sort of, where is ACG or where is DealMAX, kind of focused in on looking at pricing. It sounds like you certainly do want more sort of the deal makers there versus the service provider.
Well, the service provider, and again, we're moving to the concept of M&A partners. The service providers have made such a change in the trajectory of this industry. And I think back 20 years ago when you had a deal room, right? And it was a bunch of copy machines and boxes full of paper and the war room, and 10 people flew in to some, now it's a virtual data room. You think about the change the quality of earnings has brought to the understanding of the value drivers of the business. You think about how sophisticated the legal profession has become and the entry of products like rep and warranty insurance and intellectual property investigation and the sophistication of HR. One of our partners is Insperity. They've done 2,500 M&A integrations for their private equity clients. Those M&A partners are just so vital, not just in deal origination, but in value creation. And that's the reason to spend time with them. Even if you're a deal origination professional, if you're a deal origination professional and you're not building relationships with M&A partners, if you're in consumer goods, you should know the best of the best in consumer goods. They're going to tell you about a deal that they worked on 2 years ago that's going to be really relevant to something that's in your pipeline today. So
Now, a lot of those M&A partners are, I think a number of them would be sponsors, right? Sponsor companies, right? So,
Absolutely. Yep.
you know, a lot of these things can't happen without those sponsoring
Yeah,
companies,
that's
right?
right. Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody should be mindful that roughly sponsorship is 40% of the revenue of an event like DealMAX or an organization like ACG. So you're paying 40% less for your ticket. I think that's well worth a thank you, and tell me a little bit more about what you do and how we might work together.
Yeah. Well, it's a symbiotic relationship. A lot of people, it's what we tell people, you
Yeah.
got to have, you can't just have the private equity and the investment bank just talking about deals. I mean, there have to be people in and around, right? That entire, ecosystem.
Well,
And that
I'll just
ecosystem,
say this as an investment
lawyers are,
bank. I mentioned this before, but as an investment bank, 90% of the referrals and the clients I got came from my relationships with accounting firms, law firms,
right.
commercial banks, wealth advisors, search professionals. I spent a lot of time getting to know those folks, and
Yeah.
that had
Yeah. They
really,
remember you on the next deal. Yeah.
yeah,
Right. They
absolutely.
remember you on that next deal. Certainly lawyers and accountants are some of the unsung heroes, if you will, of deal flow.
Yes, absolutely.
Uh, and if you're working, and look, it one hand washes the other, right? Which is basically if they refer a deal, you're gonna like, hey, they're my go-to accounting firm or they're my go-to law
Exactly.
firm. So that's important. So we spent quite a bit of time on this, and I want to wrap up on two things. One is, where do you see ACG sort of, maybe, 3, 5, 10 years from now, right? You're the CEO, you're responsible for sort of strategic kind of direction. And then we always usually end with a few takeaways for our emerging leaders, some mentorship advice that you could possibly give to some of our younger listeners in the M&A space. Calling all M&A professionals under the age of 40. Do you dream of recognition for your exceptional work in mergers and acquisitions? Are you or do you know a rising talent under 40 who consistently delivers impressive transactional results? Nominate them or yourself for the Emerging Leaders Award. I'm Roger Aguinaldo, the creator and CEO of the M&A Advisor, and I invite you to nominate yourself or your peers for the 15th Annual Emerging Leaders Awards. This awards program features winners in several categories, including dealmaker, legal, service, marketing, communication, and business development professionals. Nominations are open now and are closing on Thursday, May 23rd, 2024. Nomination process is easy. Just head on over to our website, www.maadvisor.com, or click the link in the podcast description below. We're excited to celebrate your M&A team's achievements. Don't miss out. Nominate today by going to maadvisor.com. Okay, Brent, I think we were asking about your goals for ACG as an association for the next 3, 5 years, maybe 10. If you look long term, I'm reading some of the inspirational things from on now Jeff Bezos and how he looked at Amazon as a sort of a long term, lost billions invested billions of dollars into building an infrastructure, not only for Amazon, even for his space company, right? And how he's doing that. So really, really long term for him, he's thinking 20, 30, 40, 50 years out. I'm not asking you to think that long on the association, but sort of what are your goals and strategic directions of G?
Oh, thank you. And I think in the simplest terms, it's more relevant connections. So we are already doing a pretty good job of, first off, the middle market, lower middle market remains enormously fragmented. Thousands of investment banks, thousands of private equity, thousands of corporate acquirers, the emergence of family offices and independent sponsors, and just making that more efficient in terms of deal flow and relevant deal connectivity is important. We have a pretty good toehold in that today, but we need to expand our data capabilities, just like everybody else on the planet. but also more relevant connections between our M&A partners and those deal value creation teams. ACG should be the place where I can go find the law firms who have done the most work in pet care in the last 5 years, or the firms who have the best telecom regulatory teams, because those are all relevant parts of creating value in the middle market. One of the historic contexts here is, as mentioned earlier in the podcast, ACG was a chapter-based system. So members joined chapters, and members would fill out their own chapter application as an individual. So what somebody may fill out as an individual isn't necessarily comprehensive understanding about the firm they represent and what their firm is doing. And it's hard for individual chapters to make data more robust times 60 individual chapters. So at the headquarters level, we are making investments in data connectivity, smart analytics around data, so that we can be the place that is where you find the most relevant connections for the company you're trying to grow, or the deal you're trying to complete, or the deal you're trying to sell. A lot of that has to do with industry vertical capability. I mentioned that we'll have 13,000 one-on-one meetings at DealMAX through our scheduling tool. That same scheduling tool is used in a number of chapters. We're scheduling 60 to 70,000 one-on-one meetings in a year. The next iteration is to figure out how many of those were consumer goods, how many of those were pet, how many of those were tech-enabled services, so that we can create virtual communities. It's been difficult for anybody in the industry to really create. But at the end, ACG is a networking and connective association. The more relevant connections we can create for our members, the more valuable we become.
Yeah. Well, no, good luck with that. I know how difficult it is to establish any community. Our, M&A Advisor just, wasn't basically started as a community of people. But if you provide, sort of value and services that the industry wants, a community, we found out during COVID, right? Of all times that a community was created, right? A community of people was created through, at least for M&A Advisor, thought leadership and sort of our connections and our recognition programs. We thought it valuable for people to get together. Now we don't have as many events as an ACG does, with certainly different, a great job really on a regional level, and then integrate into DealMAX, or what you guys do on a national and international level, right? So you're doing quite a few things internationally. So where does the industry, okay, so you're an association, how do you look at the industry, kind of 5-10 years out? I mean, how do you, Brent Baxter and sort of the board of ACG kind of see where all this is headed? Is this a good industry? And then we'll move into sort of mentorship. And for those earlier in their career, late 20s, early 30s, probably where you were when you found yourself turning around a company. Where's this industry going?
Well, it's a great question. And I hate to be the predictor of any future, particularly 5 years out. But I think maybe the context here is over 20, 25 odd years, the number of public companies has shrunk by half. And private equity and related family offices, independent sponsors have sort of leapfrogged from 10% of all M&A activity to a third of all M&A activity in the middle market. Whether that shift of that magnitude continues, I doubt it continues at that same rate of change. But there's little to no question that private capital is an amazing and robust source for middle market owners to exit, and also a source of capital for middle market companies to grow. M&A is always going to be here. It's part of fundamental business strategy when it's smarter to buy versus build. I think we find our strategic acquirer communities are, in retrospect, a little stunned at how private equity is winning so many deals. There's opportunities for education there to make acquirers more sophisticated. And I think if there's a big area for ACG to add more value to our members, it's in that area, value creation. Because the day of the LBO, load it up with debt, pay it down, and hope you sell it for more money, you got to create value in the portfolio.
Yeah. So, I mean, the U.S. is land of opportunity and entrepreneurism, right? So as long as you have an idea, the private capital, I think there's a lot more available capital, right? To fund a lot of the, if you will, the craziest ideas, right? So Jeff Bezos basically says, he probably couldn't have started Amazon in another country, right? He just couldn't because you didn't have that. And that was back in the mid 90s. And today, the amount of private debt, private equity, private capital, family offices, sovereigns. I mean, just quite a bit of institutional capital, professional capital is enormous compared to where it was 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. And I think it's a heyday of middle market private capital. When you think about a couple of $1 trillion sitting there in private equity and debt funds for the sole purpose of buying companies, that has to be favorable for the exiting seller or the seller with a growing business that needs capital. I think the amount of capital solutions in the middle market are historically more robust than ever. And that's a very strong demographic trend for our industry.
And ACG will be there to kind of, help that along. So let's talk to sort of those earlier in their career, maybe late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s that are maybe transitioning or maybe in the deal business now. What any advice for them? Of course, join your local ACG chapter.
Yeah, join your local ACG chapter. It's go back to that phrase, relationships are the deal. And you mentioned it earlier and I didn't, but when I left my corporate career, I knew a whole lot of people in my industry and I knew nobody in my community. And now in this 20 plus year journey with ACG, the size and of the network that I've built is, it's amazing. But it doesn't happen by accident. And I think one of the pitfalls that happens early in a career is you're often chained to a desk as an analyst or a young attorney or a young accountant, and you name it, and you're going to prove your mettle by working harder than the person next door, and you don't have time to get out and build that network. And then at some point you need it. I think at a point in my life, had a very disciplined time allocation for myself personally of how much time I was going to spend building networks, how I was going to meet new people. And that investment paid off unbelievably for me. So
even if it's 5 or 10% of your time, you're saying get into the habit of just going into these chapter meetings, meeting people. You'll have 85, 90% of your time being able to be chained to your desk or your computer, but take 5 or 10% of that time and connect with people.
And the follow on to that is it's far more important to be an active listener than it is a good talker, because that's how you make connections. That's how you understand that when you introduce person A to person B, you've just added to your own professional credibility. I tell people I've hosted a corporate peer group in the St. Louis chapter, corporate members, and done it for more than maybe 15 years. And I rarely tell that group what I do in the introduction. I don't need to. Service provider in the room. They want to be in the room to meet each other. But I sure have gotten a lot of referrals from that group of people. And it's not because I had to sell what I do or tell people how good I am.
Right. You just help connect people, which is wonderful. Wow. Brent, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share with the audience? And then maybe just we'll tell people how to reach you or go to ACG or, anything you want to talk about.
No, I think it's been terrific. I enjoyed the opportunity to spend some time with you and your listeners. And I think I would conclude with something you've already suggested. ACG really is an invaluable network, and you will make the right investment if you choose to get engaged and spend some time, and you will reap what you sow. So,
Yep. And ACG's website, I think acg.org, right? And
you
any
got
other
it.
websites
Yeah.
or people to follow, you or ACG?
Yep. Yeah, sure. Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. Terrific. Well, Brent, thank you for this time. It was wonderful, wonderful to have you. DealMAX,
Sure.
congratulations, on that. Wish you all the best, with that. And then certainly congratulations on becoming the CEO of ACG.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. That was a fascinating conversation with Brent Baxter, who shared his insights and experiences on the M&A industry. We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new from it. If you have any questions or comments for us or any of our guests, please feel free to leave them in the podcast platform of your choice or send us an email at editor@maadvisor.com. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback. And if you haven't done so already, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and subscribe to our M&A Alerts newsletter at the links in the description or on our website at www.maadvisor.com. This will help you stay updated on the latest M&A interviews and trends and support our podcast to grow and reach more listeners like you. This is Roger Aguinaldo, the creator and founder of the M&A Advisor. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our M&A Advisor community. Until next time, stay safe and happy dealing.